Hi, guys. Hi, everybody. Come on in the room. Come on in. Welcome, 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 welcome. Come on in, everybody. Thanks for joining our next live. We appreciate everybody being here. I'm going to bring in our guests. Hi, Emma.
Hi, Sophia. Hi,
How are you?
everyone.
Hi, guys. Okay, I think our next guest is here. Yes, accept. Wonderful. Oh, I see Mary waving hi. Mary, all you have to do is request to join the live.
Oh my gosh, it worked. Oh,
Yay!
Yay. Hi, Sunshine.
Welcome, 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 welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
thank
Yeah,
you. Hi,
nice, nice,
Emma.
nice. We're just waiting for Mary to come on in and then we will get started, guys. Appreciate everybody joining the live. Thank you so much. Oh, I think I see Mary there. Accept. Okay. Yay, Mary.
Woohoo.
Yay, Mary's
Awesome,
here.
Yay.
We're
awesome.
all
This is
here.
great. Thank you, ladies, for being here and doing this live and the workshop series. It's going to be amazing. So many people have been engaging and just wanting to, get started and get the conversation started. And, we have some phenomenal folks ready to talk to you guys. But before we normally start, we always start with our introduction and a land acknowledgement of the organization. So, Canadian Women of Color Leadership Network is a nonprofit grassroots organization that was established in 2018 in the Canadian National Capital Region of Ottawa. CWCLN does recognize that our office is located on the unsurrendered and unceded land of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. We acknowledge and respect all First Nation, Inuit, and Métis people for their past and present valuable contributions to this land. We respectfully acknowledge and appreciate our presence on the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation ancestral lands, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to be present in this territory with you today. And we will continue to work in solidarity towards improving the lives of our diverse people on this shared land and acknowledge the importance and commitment to decolonization towards working in partnership with our Indigenous communities. We are founded on the pillars of women in leadership, wellness, economic development, and community partnerships. We operate through a lens of an intersectional feminist post-colonialistic framework in all of our objectives. Our aim is to see racialized women, two-spirit, trans, and non-binary femmes reflected in upper-level leadership and management positions in the workplace by providing the necessary skills, tools, and connections to mitigate systemic barriers. And I want to thank the Southeast Ottawa Community Health Center for also supporting our workshops. It's amazing to have great partners out there and everybody else that supported us through our journey. And so with that, I will let you ladies have an amazing, phenomenal conversation with our amazing holistic health director, Emma. Thanks, guys. I'll be in the background.
Okay, thanks so much, Sophia. Hi, everyone. I just want to thank you all for joining. I want to thank our guest speakers for joining. I also want to thank the team at the Canadian Women of Color Leadership Network, Delia, Raquel, and Sophia, who have supported the creation of these workshops. So my name is Emma Louie. I am the Holistic Health Director. As Sophia mentioned, my pronouns are she, her. I'm joining from Gatineau on unceded, unsurrendered Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory. This is the first session of our Burnout and Holistic Health series. The title of today's talk is Burnout, Healing Herbs and Cultural Connections. And our speakers are Mary Rufail. Feel free to wave hi, Mary. And there's Mary, and then Sun Chen. Also feel free to wave hi. I'll be introducing them more in depth in a few minutes, but I just want to start by sharing a little bit about myself, why I created this series, and give an overview about burnout. And then we'll shift to our speakers who will introduce themselves. I'll ask them some questions, and then we're going to open it up for the audience, so folks who have joined, to also ask some questions. So for folks who are just joining, my name is Emily. I'm the Holistic Health Director for the Canadian Women of Color Leadership Network, and this is our Burnout series. I am Toisanese and Cantonese. I was born and raised in Ottawa, also on unceded, unsurrendered Algonquin territory. I've worked in social justice for more than 12 years, mostly water justice. I also have done research in healthcare, worked on climate and other issues. And then I'm currently a member of Biblioterre, which is a land-based co-op near Wakefield. I'm also an editor for rabble.ca. And I shifted to also working in holistic health a few years ago. I offer holistic nutrition, biodynamic craniosacral therapy, and theta healing, which focuses on core beliefs. And I work out of a couple of spaces in Ottawa and Wakefield, and virtually as well. I work with people in care work, so that includes frontline workers, caregivers, activists, people in community work and social justice. And I was just seeing a gap between these two worlds, the need for healing, as many of us work in our communities, and then the need to bring a social justice lens to health and wellness spaces. A lot of my work is trying to bring these two worlds together. I work with people to support their health, whether that's gut issues, pain, anxiety, depression, or other health conditions. And I often try and make the links between some of the bigger systems in which we live. For example, racism, white supremacy, capitalism, colonization, and patriarchy, and how these sit in our bodies. I also make connections to intergenerational trauma, which is what happened in our family lines and to our ancestors, and how that impacts our health today. So just want to talk a little bit about why I created this series. I hear many people, as I'm sure some of you do as well, hear many people talk about being burnt out. And I know social justice movement spaces, so that was happening, but it's also in many other areas as well. So I wanted to host a series that tied the very real need to address burnout and tie it to some of these bigger social justice issues. There's a lot that we're facing right now with a global pandemic, mental health crises, gender-based violence, climate anxiety, ongoing colonization, and more. Many of us are experiencing burnout, and I wanted to create a series where we can talk about how do we recover from burnout with all of this happening, and how do we reconnect to health and foster hope in these times. So I'm so excited for our guest speakers today, and also in the series. Our next one is going to be on the 17th, and it'll be every Thursday after that for a few weeks. And so we have a really amazing lineup. The themes that are going to run through the series are practical tips on foods, herbs, and nutrition that you can take away to support you through your own burnout, as well as some of the broader themes like systems of oppression that I've mentioned, racism, white supremacy, gender-based violence, and so forth, as well as intergenerational trauma and ancestral healing. My interest in burnout was that I experienced several bouts of burnout. At times I would work hours on end without taking breaks. I think there were like days where I worked like 4 to 6 hours without even getting up, and like having to go to the bathroom like so badly. Working at night, eating on the go, and generally prioritizing anything but myself. I experienced many burnout symptoms that I'm about to talk about, including compassion fatigue. Lots of people in care work or social justice experience this, and even in our own day-to-day lives, and also experiencing major digestive issues. So over the last few years, I really reflected on burnout and developed better habits. And I also did a lot of digging into the roots of burnout. And I'm still undoing some of these deeper issues that are linked to burnout, which we're going to talk about today and also in this series. And I'm currently supporting family members who have health conditions, so I'm not free from the risk of burnout, as many folks who are caregiving are in the same position. So I'm trying to be mindful of caring for myself through these times. So I just want to talk a bit about what burnout is and how it shows up in our body. And it can be basically a state of exhaustion in many different ways: mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual. And it also stems from being in fight, flight, or freeze. So fight, flight, or freeze are states that our nervous systems go into when there is a threat, whether that's real or perceived. Our bodies go into these states to protect ourselves, but they can tax the body over time and can result in burnout. And this is also known as our sympathetic nervous system. So some symptoms of being in fight and flight are increased heart rate. Our adrenal glands pump cortisol and stress hormones, and cortisol can lead to inflammation in the body, and chronic inflammation can lead to illness. And then our digestion slows because these other things are being prioritized. So over time, that can develop, people can develop food intolerances, allergies, or irritable bowel syndrome, which is just so common these days. And then things like muscle tension, pain, and so forth. And then other symptoms that show up are fatigue, anxiety, depression, headaches, waking up exhausted, or sometimes the reverse, like being wired and not being able to sleep, have insomnia, and many other symptoms. And burnout symptoms can be highly personal. So I just want to talk a bit about the factors that contribute to burnout before I pass it to our guest speakers. It can be things like chronic stress or overwork, as I mentioned, as I shared with myself. What we eat can impact burnout or contribute to it. So having a lot of stimulants like caffeine or refined sugars, refined foods, and then food sensitivities and allergies. So there can be a cyclical relationship with these. Like food sensitivities and allergies can be caused by stress, and then eating foods that we're sensitive to or allergic to can also tax our body. And then there's bigger issues like trauma, like PTSD or complex PTSD, intergenerational trauma, and collective trauma. Traumatic experiences put our bodies into fight, flight, or freeze that I talked about. People who face systemic barriers, BIPOC, racialized folks, queer communities, people with disabilities, especially through the pandemic, has had a real impact on these communities. And then the reality of racism, anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous, or anti-Asian racism. So not feeling safe in our communities can have a significant impact on our nervous system as well. And then intergenerational trauma also has a very real impact on our bodies. This trauma that was experienced by our ancestors, that could be war, famine, violence against women, or gender-based violence, can also have an impact on our health. And then there's collective trauma, like COVID is one very real and present experience that we're having, and as well as the climate crises. And then I want to talk about grind culture or capitalism. I think it's really important to talk about our economic system, which feeds or causes burnout. We're often taught that our worth is tied to productivity, that rest is lazy, and many of us feel guilty resting. And only things or work that have money attached to it have value. So being a parent or doing care work or art or healing don't have value in our society. We also live in a society that values hyper-individualism. So when we burn out, we're like, the blame is placed on us individually, that it's our fault, and then we're required to heal alone. So it's really important to talk about community and community care in these conversations. And then I also want to talk about the extractive nature of capitalism, and that pervades our communities. So we may subconsciously believe that our bodies are limitless or indispensable resources, and our bodies, particularly for Black and brown bodies, and the earth are actually treated that way. So some of the work I do is working with people to address some of these bigger systems through craniosacral therapy or through core belief work, as well as nutrition. And so with that, we're going to turn it to our guest speakers who are going to talk about what we eat and drink and how that can support us through burnout. So I am very excited to introduce Mary to start. So Mary Rufail is a community educator with a focus on plant growing and community work, and teaches at Algonquin College in the Community Justice Services program. She has a social work background, a master's in social work, and years of experience working with nonprofit organizations and community gardening for the past decade. Born in so-called Halifax, Mary is of Egyptian background, speaks 4 languages, and is especially interested in bringing people together to connect with nature and our diverse cultural roots. And with that, I'm very excited to pass it over to Mary.
Thank you, Emma. I'm also really excited to be here. Can folks hear me? Yay. My pronouns are she and her, and yeah, I think that's summarized, I think, for the purposes of the introduction. That summarized it pretty well. I can add that I'm learning a 5th language, which is part of my kind of deepening my connection to my Egyptian roots. So it's Metreminkimi, also known as Coptic, which predates Arabic, predates colonized Egypt. And that is connected to kind of the deepening that I've been working on in different ways of connecting to my roots with plants. And that was actually kind of one of the main ways that I was able to connect with my cultural background, having grown up in so-called Canada. It was a kind of a conflicted, complicated process of internalized racism and a lot of what I think a lot of us go through. But when I got to a point in my life in my 20s of starting to appreciate the roots that I had, gardening and being able to grow some of the plants that my parents brought over was one really important way to connect with my parents and to connect with my roots. So I'll talk more about that when we're talking about our herbs. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much, Mary. And welcome folks who have just joined. This is the Burnout and Holistic Health series hosted by the Canadian Women of Color Leadership Network. We now have our next guest speaker, Sunshine. I'll introduce her, and then she's just going to share a bit about herself and her work. So Sunshine was born in Beijing, China. She lives in Ottawa, where she's an urban farmer and educator. She has a background in biology and ecology and has over 20 years of experience working as a research scientist, conservation biologist, and sustainability educator. She and her partner founded and run the Chi Garden, a small ecological farm in Ottawa. It is cultivated as a place for diverse vegetables and herbs, as well as community conversations around food and our connected traditions. So with that, I am very excited to pass it over to Sunshine.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you, Emma. And it's such an honor to be here with you and to explore the topic. I'm a newcomer to Canada, and I have lived in Ottawa for the past 6 years. And growing up, I always was interested in the natural world, just taking forever walking home from school to where we lived, to just my mom was wondering where I was because they couldn't no matter how slow you walk, it wouldn't take that long to go home. I was just exploring every single like blossom and little bugs on the side of the road, and just going through urban parks to just basically lost myself in that nature. And then naturally I chose biology as a major going to college, and the enthusiasm was really dampened by the way that it's so sectored, and it's not what I imagined it to be. But decided to continue. I became a research scientist in America, going to graduate school at the same time, doing at the time the very new human genetics and animal genetics study. And it was still like laboratory work, and my love for the natural world only overlap limitedly. So I continue on working as a conservation person for different nonprofit groups. And this is the time period that was both very exciting, but also that I think that's the first time I experienced burnout and didn't even have any vocabulary to describe what I was going through. And now after coming to Canada, just trying to really explore how to reestablish that balance, we decided to use more of our hands and hearts to cultivate, and in the same time raising our child. We have one son who is now 14-year-old, to really growing up with that nature connection. So we continue adding to our farms all the rediscovery of a lot of the vegetables, herbs, forest greens into our garden. In the meanwhile, really exploring ways to find that balance, but also answering some of the questions that I felt so perplexed while working as a researcher and a conservation biologist. Without the internal balance, how can we go out to the world and then fight all of these battles? So really glad to be sharing some of that that continued journey here with you today.
Okay, thanks so much, Sanshan, for sharing your background and your experiences. So you alluded a little bit to burnout as well, and I wonder if you want to elaborate on that a bit more about your own experience with burnout.
Yeah, for sure. I think this was like almost 10 years ago, in 2011, around 2011 and 12, there was a conference that was going to happen in Brazil, and it's called the Earth Summit. The Earth Summit started in 1972 as a way for humanity to address the crisis that climate change wasn't even a word at the time, maybe global warming, but all the crises, ecological biodiversity at the time. I was at the time, my son was 4-year-old. I was working. I think I hear Emma sitting for a long time, or traveling, barely, sleeping just as little as I can manage. And I just remember getting ready and being one of the very few nonprofit organizations going to this convention. There is a lot of, also you feel responsibility on your shoulder, and just trying not to fail, not to disappoint, and trying to really represent folks who can't make it there well. I think that's the first time I just remember I couldn't, no matter what I do, I just couldn't find the kind of enthusiasm or rigor that I should have being in this very excited place. I remember walking into, I just didn't know what was with me. So I walked into a Chinese traditional medicine store. You know how these medicine places that has little drawers, and each drawer had some herbs in it. And my grandmother on my mother's side, her family, which she broke off with, used to be one of the large traders of traditional medicine. I didn't inherit any of that medicinal knowledge, but I love the smell of these stores. I went in, talked to the doctor almost in tears, just asking if he could give me something to treat this fatigue that I couldn't recover. It's like a drained battery. No matter what you do, you can't recharge the battery. I just remember that while I was preparing for today's sharing, I remember that time just feeling so at the bottom of a valley. And I don't even remember what happened with the herb. I remember it being very expensive and very I probably spent a lot of my humble salary on that, but I don't remember that it healed me. So just sharing a little bit of, maybe the doctor was a good one, the herb were very good, but I guess the word holistic also means awareness and community support more than just the herb itself. I'll leave with that.
Yeah, thanks so much. Like drained battery, and then what you're saying about the holistic support, not just the herbs themselves, but really having that overall support. I'm going to pass it to you, Mary, but first I'm just going to welcome folks who are just joining. We are doing the Burnout and Holistic Health series, and we have Sunchen and Mary Rufael with us today. So Mary, I'm going to pass it to you and ask you to share your experiences with burnout.
Yeah, no, and I want to also say how privileged I feel to be in this space with Sunchan and you, Emma, that I've had the privilege to get to know over the past couple of years and share our experiences. One of them being burnout. I worked most of my work experience has been in the nonprofit sector. Mostly in Toronto. And I think it's becoming more and more recognized as more of us talk about it. I've heard of the nonprofit sector being referred to as the nonprofit industrial complex also, because the fact that the work is value-based and is really for the love of it and the passion of it and the belief in what we're doing. And because it is based in a capitalist economic system that relies on short-term funds and grants, the work relies on overwork and underpay. Basically, I was finding myself working the equivalent of a couple of people's jobs, literally, because there was attrition, and one position that I had had a couple of other people in it previously, with the same expectations of what the work involves. And it's really confusing and conflicting when it's work that you love with people that you love, and you're not finding the energy to do it all. There's a tendency to think that there's something wrong with you, because shouldn't this be energizing, doing the work that you really believe in? And we refer to the system, but that's what it does rely on ultimately, is that we will drive ourselves down to the ground because we believe in it, and it's not recognized as work that needs to be paid for and supported in ways that are sustainable. So it, unfortunately, it is an all too common reality in the nonprofit as well as other sectors, that it's mostly racialized women or non-conforming gender, trans folks. It's those of us that already don't have tons of resources that carry the weight, and often first to be let go when there's cutbacks, even in the nonprofit sector. So I think the main thing that I realize is that we need to keep talking about how it's something systemic, because it is too easy to think that there's something wrong with us when we're not able, when we're exhausted and we need to take a break. Yeah, we need to be able to recognize that this is not about us. It's not a failure on our side. It's big. It's a big issue, and I think it's important to be having this kind of forum where we can talk about ways to deal with it, especially around connecting with each other, because always, like I think many things, if we recognize we're not the only ones, we're not alone, that provides a lot of support on its own. But to know that until the systems that create these conditions that lead to burnout, until those are also dealt with, we will continue to find ourselves burning out. So we can have these great healing herbs, and those are very important. They will help, but we need to also know that we'll still get really tired. We still need to take time, if we can, take time out for recovering in different ways. But what we're talking about is a big systemic issue in the way our economy works, and who's really at the front lines of keeping things running. It's mostly on the shoulders of women and gender non-conforming folks that are racialized, Black and Indigenous.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mary. I mean, there's so much that you said that resonates with me, and I'm 100% with you in that, like, I work in nutrition. I'm really interested in herbs, and our conversation today is about that. But I completely agree that we have to address these bigger systems in the way in which we work. And I think you got some support in the audience as well. Spirit Daddy, Brady, hi Brady, was strongly agreeing with you about working in the nonprofit industrial complex. And for us that work in social justice groups, like a lot of the work is unpaid, and then we have to balance between doing unpaid work and then finding paid work. And then when we are in social justice work that's paid, there's also the same issues that are leading to burnout. So I very much agree with you, and I'm happy to have that be part of this conversation, because I don't think, like in the nutrition world, it's often just about like herbs and the things that you eat, and yes, that's a part of it, but I really agree that it's these bigger things that we need to address. And also the idea I've been thinking about is like, how do we make healing part of the work? Because there is, this thinking that we go away and we heal, and sometimes that's needed. But I think too, like that links to what I was saying about individualism, is that the onus is put on the person to go away and heal, as opposed to like, how do we heal collectively? Because we're probably not the only ones that are experiencing burnout. So how do we heal this together? So we're going to shift a bit. So I just want to welcome folks that are just joining to our burnout and holistic health conversation. We're talking about healing herbs and cultural connections, but also some of these bigger issues that Mary and Sunshine mentioned as well. So I just want to zoom in a little bit, and so for folks who are, as we have these bigger conversations and folks are needing support, like how can herbs support us in burnout, and while we're recovering from burnout and solving these bigger systems. And I just want to pause and highlight this book that I'm reading that talks about exactly what you're saying, Mary, is that it's It's called Inflamed. Some of you may know this book. It's written by Rupa Maria and Raj Patel, and it talks about, it just makes comparisons between like inflammation that's happening in our bodies and then inflammation that we're seeing in the world, whether that's through colonization, slavery, the climate crisis, and so forth. And while doctors can focus on, like treatments on an individual level, we really need to be thinking about more systemic and collective solutions. Okay, so shifting to herbs, I'm going to pass to you, Mary. How can herbs support burnout?
Yeah, I mean, they could support in a direct way in terms of taking, I like to take a lot of herbs as a tea. So really simple, whether fresh or dried leaves in boiling water. That's generally how I take. So there's that, just the taking into our body. And I think also importantly, for me, it's been the process of learning about the herbs, and especially herbs that are connected to my Egyptian origins. That's been healing in terms of I think the validation of um, of a culture that tends to be, or still is, appropriated and kind of spit out in culture in different ways. So being able to take back parts of my culture is really empowering, and connecting directly with my own family and my community. So I think just as much as the actual taking in of a plant, it's the process of connecting with other people around the learning of it that's really important also. So in preparing for this, I had a number of conversations with my dad, who will probably watch this afterwards, on some of the important herbs. And I know I can start with one that I will highlight to get practical. Mint, known as na'na, and in Metramenkimi, Coptic, Amisi, so the so-called ancient Egyptian language, it would be Amisi. So mint is a plant that is extremely important in Egyptian culture. As a tea, I remember as a child it being always offered, especially when you have a stomach ache. And when you're experiencing burnout, digestive issues are often a big thing. So, so mint is really effective as a carminative. And when I was asking my dad, well, how do you define carminative? Well, essentially, it's a Latin term for expels gas. So, or that can prevent the formation of gas. And in Egyptian food, a very common thing to eat is ful, which is fava bean. So it's also very practical in Egyptian culture to drink a lot of mint. And this is mint that was grown in the garden here in Nepean, Algonquin territories. And my dad often just dries it so that we can preserve it. It smells very nice. This is, I believe, probably spearmint. I was reading a little bit about it because I drank it as a child and currently, and I didn't know much about the history, and I want to learn more about the history of the plants that I'm working with. And mint, apparently, dried mint leaves were found in Egyptian burial grounds, also known as pyramids, dating from 2,000 years ago, but they're also known to be indigenous to different parts of North Africa, Western Asia, and Europe. So in addition to it being a good plant for digestion, it's often used, the dried leaves would be crushed in food, so like yogurt with cucumbers. I think that's also something that's found in different cultures, but it's an Egyptian food also. Um, so how I would have it in a tea, I would just take like a handful, and I think most people are familiar with mint tea, but I love it fresh. Just take it right out, put it in a cup, boiling water on top, let it steep for a couple of minutes, and you're good to go.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And it's great to hear the connection with your dad, like as you were learning about it, and that's really beautiful to hear. Okay, Sunshine, I'm going to pass to you. How can herbs support burnout, and what are some herbs that you would recommend?
Sure. So, while we were preparing for this, I reflected on what are herbs. As a biologist and very drawn to botany, I do know that herbs probably is not a botanical definition. It's like weed is not a botanical definition. It really, there is a very blurry boundary between what's herbs and what are other edible plants known as vegetables. So the culture that I was brought up, the food is used as a medicine. If you eat wholesome food, and then you will hopefully already be able to stay away from illness. So there, in that sense, the herbs and medicine and food or other vegetables are very much intermingled the way I was brought up. And so much so that when we started doing farming, we started like looking into selling at farmers market, and of course you have salad mix that has 2 or 3 or 5 at most vegetables. And now our salad mix has 20 vegetables. It has like all kinds of things that are deemed as vegetable, herb, or just medicinal herb. So we try to mix as many variety as we possibly can. That's we call it like there is lettuce there, but there is also bok choy green, and there are mint in our salad mix, and more common and less common. And one of them is goji berry leaves, and we know the goji berry in those little red berries, but their leaves are very much used in especially the Cantonese culture. So we add those in, and a lot of these things are really belong to both vegetable and herb category. So, and the salad mix is met with amazement from people who see it. It's probably, we'd like to think it's one of the most diverse and in our city, in our province, and just, and beyond. But any of these vegetables, in my opinion, are in the herb category because you eat them, and they provide a very diverse phytonutrients, and each of them have different properties. And one of the things that we are lucky to be able to incorporate is a herb, but also a a weed. I don't know if folks recognize this guy here, and this is the very humble and has a different reputation, and this is dandelion. So dandelion has so many gifts to give. The leaves are eaten, and it is both, again, herb and vegetable, sort of, and the medicinal herb in one. And the roots of dandelion I make into a tea. I dry them. If you roast them, it's more like coffee, but just drying them and use them as a tea. In Chinese traditional medicine, it is considered to have so many benefits, partially to, it's very funny to hear Mary's father describe this as like repel gas. I think dandelion has a similar kind of effects, but in general, when your body is has too much heat. I think inflammation probably is like undetected in your blood, but then you can feel it in your nostrils, or just like having issues with digestion. Dandelion is one of the very humble go-to herb or vegetable that you use, and uh, like as a it's I don't know why it becomes such a hated weed in North America. It is very funny to go to garden store and see the many kind of treatment for dandelion to spray and everything. But if you get to know these plants and see at all its stage, the flower is one of the first pollinator friendly spring bloom that the bees at our farm go to. It has so many gifts to give, and just so that knowing that notion, that knowledge, that observation in combination of the properties of this plant, I think provides so much healing. And so that's one of my favorite herbs. I also harvested some mint today, but everything that Mary said.
That's so great. Thanks so much for sharing all your knowledge, both of you. And I love seeing the fresh dandelion that you picked, Sunshine. And what you said about like the line between like herbs and food really resonates with me. Like in Cantonese culture, like soups are really big, and they like so in Cantonese culture we call them soup. So one that I really love is change of season soup, and I put some of the ingredients in this jar. And so there's things like it's like often drank in my family when there is change of season, because it's such a impact on our body when we shift from summer to fall or fall to winter. But it's things like ginseng. We call this yansam in Cantonese. There's astragalus, which is wonke or bukke. There's a bunch of different like either herbs, and then there's wild yam, which could be considered a food as well. So all of these combined, like ginseng is an adaptogen, so it's really helpful for stress, really supports the body through stress. There's also red dates in here. We call it hongzhou, so it can be like food and a herb. What Sunshine was mentioning, gatesy, goji berries, also something that's added to the soup as well. So that's one of my favorites for when I need a boost. I also picked, although it wilts a lot quicker, but I picked lemon balm. I'm growing lemon balm on my windowsills. One of my favorite herbs, and it's great for anxiety. It's great for so many things. It's something that I steep in tea as well when I'm needing some support. So thank you so much for sharing all of that, and welcome to folks who are new to this IG Live with the Canadian Women of Color Leadership Network. I wonder if there are folks in the audience that have any questions for our guest speakers today, Sunshine and Mary. If you do, feel free to add it in the chat. I will ask, so as I'm, like holding out these herbs, I'm cognizant that some of them are imported, though I think those actually grown regionally. So there are some, like traditional Chinese herbs and foods that we use that are now grown locally or regionally, but some are still exported. And then I think about like climate impacts. And I wonder if either of you or both of you can speak to like how you balance, and I know some of the ones that you mentioned can be grown locally, but how do you balance connecting to your culture through herbs that are sometimes imported and then using and connecting to local herbs? And maybe I'll pass it to you, Mary, if you have any thoughts on that first.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and I think a practical and gentle approach on ourselves and each other is a good one, in that we can fall into a trap of being really hardcore, like we're only going to have local in order to be as sustainable as possible. And I'm a gardener, a grower, so I love being able to see a plant grow as locally as possible, like right in front of me. But I'm also aware that a lot of plants grow much better in different climates, and it can actually be more energy. There could be more energy use in trying to grow them in a colder climate with the heating involved. And it's also a way of the trade has been happening for thousands of years, so we don't need to stop that. There are also like more informal ways of doing it. Like I want to mention the hibiscus, which is the hibiscus flower, also known as roselle, that my dad has been getting just from family traveling, or people that we know traveling to Egypt just bring back a whole bunch of roselle. Or there's also like local businesses that import food from and herbs, including different kinds of foods and herbs from Egypt. So there are different ways of acquiring food that's not local, and also that might not be relying on a multinational company like Walmart or something. So there are ways of having still international connections that support local businesses. So you can have a little bit of both. I think a little bit of both is necessary. But mint, of course, grows really, really well outdoors in the northern climate. Of course, it doesn't grow over the winter time, but you can try to grow it indoors. And you can just have it dry. It's the idea of preserving over the winter time. The roselle is used to deal with hypertension. It really is good for, that's at least what I'm told, and I think it's worth trying when you're burning out or you're stressed. High blood pressure is an issue. So hibiscus flowers, also known as flor de Jamaica, are good for dealing with hypertension, blood pressure. It can reduce cholesterol also. So I think a little bit of a mix of approaches is practical and helpful.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mary. I'll pass it to Sunshine, and then we have a question in the audience that we'll go to after.
Yeah, for sure. I examined my the things that I use, and I do realize that some of these what I consider herb tea is a major one for me. I don't really know that. I think maybe in Vancouver I hear that people can grow tea, but by and large tea is not something that can be easily cultivated here because we're in a different climate. So I do source my tea. I try to source them directly from the growers or from the communities who live around nature reserve areas, supporting their livelihood. But by and large, tea is something that I go through a lot that I won't be able to produce myself. On the other hand, I don't know if I have a herb example, but one of the things we have been trying to do is fermentation. Your vinegar, soy sauce, beaten soybean paste, soured vegetables, kimchi and sauerkraut, and all of that. And we have been able to do them, and even do them at a scale that we can bring them to the farmers market using what's available locally. And so some of these, we call them the Ottawa version, the Ottawa edition of some of the familiar fermentation, lacto-fermented vegetables, because you can't find that ingredients as called for in the traditional recipe, especially time-wise. This is time that we simply don't have, for example, chili pepper that we can incorporate. So what are some of the alternatives? So adapt to what can happen locally is what we've been doing a lot in the past years, and it's a lot of fun. The traditions are honored. On the other hand, every tradition can be adapted and can move forward with the kind of boundaries and the areas you're in. And I can say that in the realm of fermentation, I we'll be running some fermentation workshops this winter, but just basically sharing that what is possible, which is a lot. So I'm less knowledgeable on the herb side, but I look forward to learning. I imagine that as Emma was saying, some of these herbal medicines can be grown locally.
Okay, thanks so much for that. So we have a question from Kat in the audience, and Kat is asking, what resources would you recommend for those of us who are newbies to herbs? I'll pass it to Mary.
Yeah, I'd be curious what you're interested in learning. I mean, there are different ways of approaching learning about herbs. I mean, I really love as tangible, hands-on as possible. So visiting gardens when the weather allows. As we're entering the winter season in this part of the world, I'm not sure where you are, but if also you're heading into winter time, the possibilities for the hands-on could be just even I found walking in Rona in Ottawa has one of the Ronas anyways in Nepean has a really great garden center. So like some garden centers are year long and can allow for being able just to go and touch and smell the plants and the herbs. Even some grocery stores are selling basil, rosemary, thyme, oregano. It's just fresh in pots that you can buy in a pot and keep alive. So just trying with live herbs, however you can access them is one way. There's so many written resources that you can also find. One that I would recommend is from an Anishinaabe botanical teachings. Plants have so much to give us. All we have to do is ask. And that has, it's a really comprehensive book written by Mary Sissop Genius that it also recognizes Anishinaabe indigenous teachings and approaches to plant knowledge. So that's a big one, I think, in terms of written resources, but also wherever you can talk to people like Sunchan, myself, we could offer our support for learning also. So yeah, different ways of approaching it are good.
Thanks so much, Mary. What about you, Sunshine?
I would say just start with yourself, something that smells really good to you. For me, I love basil, for example. Like that smell just brings so much peace and an undescribable kind of sense of pleasure. So I think just starting with any herb that appeal to you. And now I know that I was really attracted to the smell of sweet basil, but now I have learned through that exploration that there are many different basil varieties, and one of our favorite these days is the Thai basil that we now grow in our garden. And I am a bookworm and I'm a very nerdy, so I go in and read so much about different varieties of basil, and somehow it just stoked that sense of finding more about yourself. Oh yes, I do know, because when I travel they serve this dish. Oh, that's what it was. So I think there are so many entry point, but I do want to show a book very quickly. This is a book that I think how Mary and I got talking and started connecting through discovering discovering weeds. So this is called The Wild Wisdom of Weeds. It is including weeds, so-called weeds, you can find all over the world. Very humble ones such as dandelion and plantain. So this is a book that I think is very accessible in terms of the herbs that you don't even need to grow because they're on your lawn already.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'll just share, we're going to be wrapping up soon, but I'll just share a few books too. I'm a bookworm as well. And I've been developing a practice at nighttime where I have a tea and then I read about it and like in all these different sources and really like, like reflect on it and like taste it. But one book that I've had for a long time is the Desktop Guide to Herbal Medicine. I like it because it actually has the names in different languages, like a lot of different languages. I also have a couple of books related to traditional Chinese medicine. This is your guide to health with food and herbs, using the wisdom of traditional Chinese medicine. I just got this book. I mentioned soups in Cantonese culture is really big, healing herbal soups. And then so it's like fall, so I've like been like getting all these books. And then this one too, it's new to me, but I like it because it has a lot of pictures. It gives like history and background. And so what I'll do is I'll just gather all the names of these books and Sunshans as well. And I'll put them in the comments related to this post for this event. So folks can go on there. So before we wrap up, I just want to take a moment and do a round. So if folks want to work with you, Mary and Sunshan, how can they do that? How can they get a hold of you? Where can they follow up with you? Mary, I'll pass to you.
I barely use Instagram, but this might be a good way to encourage me to actually start using it. So since this session is through Instagram, I'm Brown Thumb Mary. So that's one way to connect with me, and I can follow up. Or yeah, I think that's probably the best way.
Okay, Sunshan?
Yeah, for sure. I am relatively active on Instagram, so I imagine that we can add to the comments my account. So I have a personal one, but also the Chi Garden, our farm, also has a page. And I should mention that this weekend, Saturday and Sunday, we're having a community for the 4th year in a row. We're having a community harvest of sunchoke, aka Jerusalem artichoke, at the farm. And so yeah, you can directly message me about coming to the farm, check it out, and dig some sunchoke to take home and leave some for us, kind of community harvest. And it'll be a good opportunity to check out maybe some of the herbs that we mentioned today.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, and folks can go onto the Canadian Women of Color page, and then the tags for Mary and Sunshine will be there, and folks can work with me. I'm actually launching a 6 or 12-week burnout program, and it will focus on addressing burnout in a holistic way through nutrition, food, herbs, and so forth. Also core belief work, as well as body work. And folks can reach me at This Is Emma Louie, also tagged on the Canadian Women of Color page. And so with that, I thank you so much, Mary and Sunshine. It's so great to be in conversation with you. I learned so much. I hope folks did too. There was lots of hearts and things as you were talking. And then just thank you so much, everyone, for joining. And I'm going to pass it to Sophia now to close.
Oh, what a conversation. I learned so much about herbs and the healing of herbs. Thank you so much, all of you, for coming into the platform and just giving back, and nurturing this conversation and nurturing others, to be able to heal with food and herbs. It really is important for us. And I never really knew a lot, and now I'm learning more from all of you. So thank you so much. It was a lovely, lovely conversation. Mary and Sunshine, oh my goodness. It's a blessing to get to know you both. Mary, I've met you before. Sunshine, I'm just getting to know you. So I'll be following you on your platforms and and seeing what you guys post. And of course, Emma, our holistic health director, we love you so much for bringing so much goodness and wellness to the space. And I want to thank everybody that had questions for everyone and just, joining in on the platform. So you guys know us, Canadian Women of Color Leadership Network. We are on all platforms here on IG, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. So please join us on those various platforms. We'll be back again next week at 1 o'clock with another great conversation with Emma and her other guests. So stay tuned, guys. Thank you so much and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.